So Exodus Crash is your Grandmaster Nightfall for this week. Fellas, we're gonna go over a number of different things that we tried today. Now, I was really trying to optimize this entire Nightfall, but if there's one thing to be said about Exodus Crash, even though it may not be one of the hardest Nightfalls, it's just one of those Nightfalls that's just slow and steady. Don't expect speed runs like we got last week with Lake of Shadows when we were running those Nightfalls in like 8 to 9 minutes. The goal for us was just to kind of get into that sub 15-minute territory, which is about where you're gonna be at. Now, first and foremost, let's go over some of the modifiers for this week's Nightfall. We have Arachno. When defeated, Fallen Vandals will spawn that web mine at their feet. You have Overload champions and Barrier champions, all the Grandmaster modifiers, as well as Champions Mob, and of course, Thavic's implants. Incoming arc and environmental damage is increased, which is why I highly advise guys wearing an arc resist mod in this Nightfall. Now, what weapons and builds were working really well here? Guys, we actually ended up committing here to TQ's Divination. You're only dealing with Overload champions and Barrier champions. On top of that, the only shields you're going to be dealing with in this Nightfall are really just solar shields. So we ended up double dipping here with TQ's Divination, and it actually did really good. If y'all remember, we ended up using this bow during the Hollow Lair Nightfall. It was good there because it could track those little mini screeps. What I liked about it here is just purely its explosions. And two ways to really get more of those explosions is just having someone else on your team rocking TQ's Divination. On top of that, if you got the exotic catalyst, your damage is also getting ramped up. The other weapon that we decided to bring into this Nightfall is actually a sword. Now, we saw last week with some builds that people were utilizing in Lake of Shadows, folks were actually using swords in that Nightfall, which, by the way, was a good idea. We just found that the build that we used was just a little bit better. This week, though, considering the boss, which is right on top of you, it's really hard landing sleeper shots and other linear fusion rifle shots. And normally we would use things like 1000 voices like we did in the master version of this Nightfall, but that ammo economy is pretty bad, even with folks rocking Aeon Gauntlets. As in, you got to make sure you're constantly getting finishes off for your teammates. The middle ground that we found, though, was actually rocking a sword alongside the artifact mod passive guard. Now, Les and Bombad were both rocking this mod. I was not. It really does help, though, as it gives you resist while wielding your sword against combatants. Now, let me just walk you through the two different routes that we went with. We actually did a single Well of Radiance, an Ursa Furiosa, and a Shadebinder. That was like the slow and steady, and we essentially were able to get done with this Nightfall within about 17.5 to 18 minutes. The Ursa Furiosa was really nice, especially in the boss room, whenever the boss really just rushes you and all those ads are trying to just get on top of you. Ursa does a really good job of boxing your teammates in, keeping them safe, while simultaneously giving you a damage buff to your teammates. The problem with Ursa Furiosa is that I just didn't feel like I was getting that much out of it in the main room. This middle room area is where you're going to be spending a majority of the time in this Nightfall. There's a lot of things that spawn here, a lot of Overload champions and Barrier champions, and with Ursa Furiosa, despite me giving Weapons of Light buff to my teammates for this, I just didn't really feel like it was helping them much, although it was very nice in those moments when I needed to pop and either get a res or just shield my teammates. Again, that's the slow and steady. The more optimal method is actually starting with this mod right here that can be slotted on to your class item, and that is Withering Heat. Causing damage with solar abilities weakens champions for a short duration. Now, Withering Heat is low-key meta against champs, and in that big room where you have so many champions pouring out at you, Barrier and Overloads, some of them pouring out 2 at a time, 3 at a time, this room can overrun you if you don't deal with these champions quick. Now, there's multiple ways to really debuff these champions. If we were dealing with unstoppable champions, particle deconstruction is one of the best ways to do that, which is still good even in this Nightfall, but we're dealing with Overload and Barrier champions. And even though you can rock something like particle deconstruction, considering my weapon loadouts, as well as bombads and less, I needed to depend on another way to debuff my enemies. One of them being Withering Heat. This is actually a 30% debuff, and it will apply to any champion as long as you hit them with some solar ability, whether it's your grenade, your melee, your super, whatever. This is a debuff that will last for 6 seconds. Now, a couple things I was utilizing to take advantage of this, although it is not specific to the Titan class. Again, any solar ability, so whether you're playing on Dawnblade or Gunslinger, I just happened to be on my Titan today and I was taking advantage of Hallowfire Heart. This, of course, actually improves the recharge rate of your solar abilities, and it greatly improves those abilities when your super is charged. Needless to say, guys, I was pooping out solar grenades and solar melees left and right. Now, I did rock Middle Tree, which Burning Maul, especially those mini throwing hammers, are really good, especially if you get it amped up to ×3. It was just a little risky, and sometimes I would miss my hammer. Honestly, just felt more comfortable on Bottom Tree, dropping a few sunspots off here and there, applying some burn harvest some enemies, as I was also taking advantage of Warmind cells. Now I know Warmind cells have been nerfed, but in this main room right here, Warmind cells really are not that bad. I'm still utilizing mods like Rage of the Warmind for that additional explosion, Wrath of Rasputin, which by the way dips into TQs and can create Warmind cells, as well as Warmind's protection, burning cells, and of course global reach. Do you have to rock a Warmind cell build here? No, you don't. But for what I'm utilizing here with Withering, it just synergized really well, which is why we were using it. And a lot of times I would just run around, especially with Hellfire Hearts, I would throw a Thermite grenade down, apply that debuff to a champ, get a stun off, which by the way, you can stun an overload champion, even with TQ's hipfire shot, and then proceed to go up and get the overhead slam here with Crown Spitter. Is it as good as like Energy Accelerant Crown Spitter? No, but it's still dang good. 30% debuff tacked on here for Crown Splitter, and its heavy attack does a significant amount of damage. And Les and Bombad both were rocking Falling Guillotine. The only problem with this build though is that it is risky. When you get into that final boss room, if you find yourself in a bind, you don't have Ursa Furiosa to fall back on. So in the least, my suggestion would be to get through this Nightfall with the loadout that I just talked about, Ursa Furiosa, slow and steady. And then as you begin to understand this Nightfall more and more, then you can branch out to some of these other builds and start taking advantage of things like Withering Heat, maybe even Particle Deconstruction, and just start optimizing. With that being said though, Les and Bombad's loadouts really didn't change at all. Les had Phoenix Protocol and Well of Radiance, same combination that I had in terms of TQ's Divination. Bombad was rocking Shadebinder with of course the normal stuff, right? Stacy, Ice Flare Bolts, etc. If you're having an issue with staying alive, again guys, Charged with Light is free, especially if you got a fire team rocking mods like Radiant Light, Powerful Friends, and whether you want to combine that with Charge Harvester or Taking Charge, rock that with your Protective Light, and just about at all times, you and your team will have Protective Light at the ready, just in case you need that extra resist. Now let's talk about the Nightfall itself. Guys, this Nightfall is really the most aggravating in the very beginning. The pikes, man. These things, if Bungie made everything in Destiny 2 as difficult as these pikes, we would never be able to beat a raid. It's ridiculous how good these pikes are. They will insta-shred you. Never, and I mean never, try to 1v1 these pikes. And TQ's actually wasn't that bad with dealing with them. I would try to like land a grenade launcher shot on them. And if you're wondering, does blinding grenades on a grenade launcher blind the dregs on the pikes? No, it doesn't. I've tried. They go right through it and they proceed to kill you. Now this whole front area, you'll be met with a captain at the end of it. You'll then have 2 other overload champions before getting to that mid-room area. This is the area that can be a problem room for you. And we spent many hours here, and there's just times, especially with how everything spawns, that you can just suddenly find yourself surrounded. My suggestion, guys, is after you actually activate the plate and start standing on it, if you don't feel comfortable with the amount of ads that are pouring out, just progress this section a little at a time. As soon as you see ads spawn, just step off the plate. Quit trying to cap it too fast, because all the ads will keep spawning out if you do so. And if you find yourself really in a pickle, back all the way up into the hallway area and bring the ads to you. Now, is this optimal? No. Running around and killing everything immediately is the optimal way, but that's a little more difficult, of course, and risky. But you'll have a number of waves here of enemies. The servitors that spawn in will be barrier champions, and they will be the most annoying, as they will grant immunity to the surrounding enemies. I wish I can just say, hey, kill those servitors immediately, which you can, but it is a little more difficult with swords. A lot of times we ended up only killing one of them, leaving the other one still up, granting immunity to enemies, and we would normally have to back up and bring the overload captains to us, which by the way can instantly teleport to that plate. And if they teleport behind you, that's pretty much a GG. Now, upon dealing with these captains, you can finally move up and kill that servitor, and then proceed to go over there and progress the plate even further. You'll have those overcharged shanks come in, heavy shanks, which have the solar shields, and some overload captains. Really, this room is not that difficult after you get past the servitor part. If you can get past the servitor part, you've got this room handled. Now, moving into the next phase, you have to go through these arc pulses, gather them, and you'll have to kill this fallen walker before entering into the room before the boss room. We like to go up to the right side, guys. Yes, the ship can still kill you on its way out. Just dodge it, look right at it, and just keep moving. Don't stand still, and then proceed to kill the walker. Now, going into this next room, this room is so much better than what it used to be a long time ago. You've got a single captain, that's an overload champion, and just a couple of ads. And there used to be way more in this room. This room was super aggravating at one time, because there was like a mini boss in here as well. But deal with all these ads, and now you'll be in the boss room. Now, the boss room does have some cheese spots. But look, man, I don't want to stay here for 35, 45 minutes. Now, I'm sure Cheese Forever has already found another cheese spot, which I'm sure has a little more accessibility. We just like the area there to the left. This is a good little cubby spot for a couple reasons. Number one, if you find yourself in a pickle, you can actually jump up on those crates. It doesn't offer you complete protection, but it offers you some protection. And number 2, this spot does a really good job of making the boss come to you. And considering we're rocking swords here, that's ideally what we want. Now, the only other mod that we were rocking here, considering that Bombat is rocking stasis turrets, is actually the mod Focusing Lens. Again, this still applies to any of the outgoing damage from Well of Radiance. And we would actually pop a Well of Radiance, bring the boss to us, and then proceed to do our sword damage after Bombat has applied some stasis. Now, sometimes it wouldn't work. Like the boss would just move right out of there, and we weren't able to actually take advantage of Focusing Lens. The main thing about this entire boss damage phase is the moment the boss gets close enough to you, you want to shred him as quickly as possible. Because if you keep knocking a third of his health down, guys, he will teleport away, allowing you to just focus on the ats. Staggering your supers is very important here, and I would highly advise saving your supers when the barrier champions spawn. Now, Les was rocking Phoenix Protocol, so he's getting his super back fairly quickly, especially in combination with things like Ursa Furiosa. Bombat, of course, was rocking the mod Power Preservation, which makes more orbs. It's a stasis mod found on your helmet, and it only actually provides more orbs based on the kills from your super. So not necessarily good with things like Bubble or Well, or even Ursa Furiosa for that matter. But for an offensive super like Shadebinder, it does produce more orbs. But staggering your supers here, guys, is what's going to clutch up for you. And the main thing is, you can avoid a lot of issues if you just do enough damage to the boss. You'll do a third of his health, he'll teleport. You'll do another third of his health, he'll teleport again. And then he'll rush you. And in that moment, you want to just go all in with your swords. I normally would do a barricade for protection with a rift underneath. And the barricade wouldn't necessarily protect us from his melee attacks, but it would protect us from his shrapnel launcher, allowing us to move in at full health. And we can normally tank a single melee swipe from him. And that would be enough time for us to kill him with our swords. So guys, that is your Grandmaster Nightfall for this week. We will be reviewing the God Roll Adept Comedian as it is dropping this week. Shadowprice and its Adept version is also dropping this week. Again, this Nightfall can be optimized even more than what you're seeing here. And I fully expect to see some better speed runs than even this. And if we happen to come across an even better strategy than this, you'll be hearing from us very quickly. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.